Hello, my name is Joey Class, and today I'm going to be talking about fast fashion and how it hurts the environment and people specifically. I'm going to be arguing for it to be regulated because of the damage it causes to the environment, the culture over consumption it promotes, as well as how it affects society and workers. Every year, 92 million tons of textile waste is created by the fashion industry. According to the Environmental Protective Agency, most of it ends up in landfills just sitting for decades to decompose. Even more concerning, the items are only worn a few times. Imagine this: you go and you buy a shirt, you might wear it once or a few times. Now imagine the same process practiced millions of times across days. The clothing just doesn't disappear. It ends up in landfills and just sits there, adding even more to the long-term environmental damage. Today I'm going to be talking about fast fashion, what it is, and how it became so prevalent, how it affects the environment, and how it affects workers and society. Fast fashion is the process where companies roll out clothing quickly and cheaply to meet popular trends. According to Chen and others, they rely on cheap labor to keep the costs low. Online media and online shopping and social media also play a pivotal role, making it more accessible for people to buy from the comfort of their home. For example, companies like Shein, Zara, H&M, they roll out thousands of new collections every week, and this puts pressures on consumers to try to meet with these demands. In the end, they end up buying more than they actually need and treating clothing as disposable rather than something valuable. Now that we know what fast fashion is, I'm going to talk about how it affects the environment. Specifically, fast fashion affects the environment with large amounts of waste, pollution, and water usage. The fashion industry puts a huge strain on global water resource. The United Nations Environment Program states that the chemical or the dye process releases chemicals into local water supplies, which hurts communities that live near factories. The fast fashion industry doesn't affect just the environment, it also affects the communities. A lot of these communities rely on the water for cooking, drinking, farming. It's for their daily life. And this ends up hurting their health and hurting their way of life. Another aspect is textile waste. The fashion industry produces over 92 million tons of textile waste. According to the EPA, a lot of it ends up sitting in landfills. And a lot of times they use non-synthetic materials such as nylon, polyester, and these don't break down easily. They could end up sitting for years, just adding more damage. Finally, fast fashion also affects climate change. Global transportation as well as mass production adds to carbon emissions, and all the clothes that isn't sold, it ends up getting burned, which increases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Because clothing is so cheap, people buy more than they need, which increases waste and environmental damage even further. But the damage doesn't stop with the environment, it also affects workers. Fast fashion has serious effects on workers and society. In order to keep prices low, companies often rely on cheap labor in developing countries. According to Chen and others, they often pay the workers low, make them work in unsafe conditions for very long hours. Imagine working 12-hour shifts just so someone across the world can buy clothing that they might only wear once. This system prioritizes profit over worker well-being. Fast fashion also contributes to global economic inequality. Wealthy countries benefit from cheap clothing while workers in poor countries are not fairly compensated. Most of the profit goes to large corporations rather than the people who actually produce the clothing. Finally, fast fashion promotes harmful societal values. It normalizes overconsumption and encourages people to buy new items instead of valuing what they already have. It also disconnects consumers from how their clothes are made and the impact these choices have. Because of these issues, there have been efforts to regulate the fashion industry. Legislation such as the Fashion Accountability and Sustainability Act aims to hold companies responsible for their practices, making their actions more transparent, which can include such as where their clothes is made, how they affect workers, how they affect pollution, and how they practice worker labor laws. This shows that change is possible, but also highlights how serious the problem has become. Because without regulation, companies are not being held responsible for the damage they cause. After looking at these impacts, it's clear that something needs to change. Fast fashion affects more than its clothing. It affects our environment, economy, and people around the world. In conclusion, it is clear that we live in tough times, so maybe it's impractical to just outright ban fast fashion clothing. But what we as consumers can do is be more conscious of our purchases, choose more sustainable clothing, as well as brands that have a good practices when it comes to making clothes, as well as support legislation such as the Fashion Accountability and Sustainability Act, which aims to hold companies responsible. Fast fashion may seem convenient, but its true cost is something we could no longer ignore.